So a couple of months ago, I had this idea. I wanted to learn more about the world of traditional Les Pauls. I had played the Juniors and the P90s, which were my personal favorite, but I wanted to learn more about the classic HH layout. The type of thing that I'd seen a lot of players that I really enjoy, like Bonamassa and Slash, really leave their stamp on over the years, and see if that thing in specific was still for me. Now, obviously, seeing whether or not you like a guitar is not necessarily the hardest task in the world, but for some reason with this one specifically, I wanted to go a little bit deeper than usual. I knew that the Gibson fan base, specifically the traditionalists, were probably the most passionate fans out there when it came to knowing the exact details and what they wanted in a Les Paul. So I started asking around, and not just regular people, like my friends who really knew about Les Pauls. And one day in particular, when I was on FaceTime with my friend Andy, he started to tell me about this very specific one that he had been playing. He said he had bought it more recently and that he was playing it at home and bringing it to shows. And more importantly, he said it was probably a better place to start learning about what people actually wanted in more traditional Les Pauls than maybe some of the studio sessions that I had been scoping out at the time. Now, because I trusted him, I knew it would probably be best to take his advice, but right as I was doing this, I had this sort of thought. What if instead of solely looking at the Gibsons like the Les Paul standards, I made a slight pivot into different territory? You see, I noticed a few of my friends playing these guitars called Eastmans, and although I had owned a few of their acoustics over the years, people seemed to be non-stop raving about some of their Gibson alternatives, specifically their 335s, and can you guess the other one? Well, I'll give you a second. Yeah, you guessed it. They're Les Paul style guitars. This exact one being called their SB59, which was this very vintage looking single cut. It was lightly relicked and it had no pickguard. And I mean, even just from the pictures online, I could tell that this thing looked just as beautiful as like Lori Loughlin on Full House, so I decided to give it a try. But when it got here, something felt just like a little bit off. I knew that I liked it, but I didn't know the specifics behind what actually set it apart from the Gibson. So I started doing some digging, like some deep digging into who was playing them, what people liked about them, and the further that I went down this rabbit hole, I started wanting to learn more about the specific eras of Les Pauls that these guitars were trying to emulate. And since I had absolutely no idea anything about the history behind these guitars, I decided once again to find a friend who did. Except for this time, it was a different friend. You see, I had visited my friend Gabe earlier this year, and he had really gotten into vintage Gibsons. Not just on the surface level, but I had noticed as almost like a historian, and I knew that he would be the one to ask. So I shoot him a text with some of the very basics. Hey, I'm doing a video on some of the 50s style Les Pauls. Can I interview you and ask you a couple questions? And he agrees. We make a plan and set a time. And the day comes, I have my list of questions and I just start firing. What do people like Gibson fans actually want in a Les Paul? What's the difference between a 50s and a 60s model? And why are people so passionate about some of the modern changes that they've made? All whilst doing this, trying to relate it to the Eastman, as well as once we started talking, telling him more about my experience with the Eastman in real time. And all of a sudden, our conversation slightly shifts from the history of Gibson to the other alternatives that people seem to be playing and raving about. And although Eastman seemed to be the star of the moment, there was one other brand mentioned that a lot of other people seemed to be claiming was like the real Les Paul. Now, I'd heard of some of these guitars before, but unlike the Eastmans, I'd never played any of their models or I think even seen them in person. And I had absolutely no context about just how popular these guitars actually were, but once I started looking more into the lore and the actual history behind these guitars, I realized that a few of the Les Paul players that I had previously only associated with Gibson had actually taken their swing with some of these. And I'm not just talking randos, I'm talking the big cats like Gary Moore. All of them giving a shot to these so-called amazing Michigan guitars that may or may not be worth the hype. And in case you were wondering, these guitars, well, they were called Heritage. So, ladies and gentlefish, this is the Heritage H150, and in a lot of ways, surface level, it's basically everything that I was expecting from like a Les Paul alternative. Everything that my buddy had originally told me about some of the standard specs on these traditional Les Pauls were there. 12-inch radius, C-shaped neck, 2-volume, 2-tone, but visually was really the first place where I started to notice some of these differences because the do or die for a lot of people seemed to be right here. with this headstock, because it's definitely different. It's different than the Sires, the Epiphones, the Eastmans, you name it. But it wasn't just the looks. I started to do more research into the backstory behind some of these guitars, and it turns out that a lot of the reasons why some people like them is because they're made in the original Gibson factory in Kalamazoo, Michigan. They were a company started by literal former Gibson employees after they had moved their base of operations to Nashville, and thus these guitars were born. But I knew learning about the history was really only one half of the equation. The real fun wasn't going to actually begin until I plugged this thing in and actually saw what it could do. So today we got the Vibro Champ with the Royer. So as with a lot of guitars, a lot of where I started in terms of sound was really a combination of what pickups were in here, as well as my approach to two-volume, two-tone guitars since I started getting into the Eastmans and other Les Paul style guitars more recently. And if we're strictly talking about pickups as opposed to the burst buckers that they have in the 50 standards that I was playing, these actually have Seymour Duncans. And when it came to putting them to the test per se, there were a few positions just from having watched different Les Paul players that I really respect do their thing that definitely became like my go-tos. The first of which being the classic bridge pickup Les Paul overdrive thing that you can just go on forever with. Now the middle positions were really where, until I started playing the Eastman and doing a lot more research into different Les Paul players, I realized how much versatility I was taking for granted when it comes to two-volume, two-tone guitars, especially like Les Paul alternatives. Because over the years I've realized just how much of a weapon the volume knob can be in your three basic positions, but once you get to the middle position, not the middle pickup because I have to remind myself to say that, just how much you can mix and match the different volumes. You can turn the volume down on the bridge and keep it high on the neck. And the other way around. So at the end of the day, what's the moral of the story and what did we learn? And I think overall, it's very similar to what I learned with the Eastmans. When you're going up against a giant like Gibson, when you know that your main market is this titan of the industry that has been around for so long, there's probably either the first or the second biggest name in all of the guitar world, what you have to offer people quality-wise has to be immaculate. Because if you want to win over even the people who might think what the modern day Gibsons are doing is not what they used to do, you have to remind them of what they used to do. And that's where I think these guitars really shine, because even just picking it up out of the box and playing it through some of my cheaper amps, I could easily tell that it was one of the best setup guitars and probably one of the best sounding guitars that I've played over the past couple years. And I'm not joking when I say that. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that these guitars are going to be for everyone. Not everyone's going to love the headstock. Some people are going to want that classic Gibson logo. Some people are going to want to know that their guitar is handmade in Kalamazoo, Michigan at the original factory. And just like with any guitar with Strat alternatives, different people are going to prioritize different things. And I think especially in having played the 50 standard and testing it up against the Epiphone in the past couple of months, I think I've really learned to figure out what I personally prioritize. But I don't think it matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know in the comments, have you played heritage guitars before? Who do you think makes the real Les Pauls nowadays? And what do you think of all of the other Les Paul alternatives as a whole? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. After the Eastman video, it was probably pretty inevitable that we were going to get here, especially with these two guitars being so different, both in weight and look and feel from the Eastmans. But if you want to know anything more about the Heritage H150, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel, if that's something you want to do. Or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I used in this video, amps, pedals, heck, even the camera, make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to all of my patrons. There's some exclusive extra content on there if you want to join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time. Most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic night.